Welcome everyone to the Iris Revenge channel. I was forced to sit alone at my sister's wedding. Then a stranger whispered, "Act like you're with me." What happened next? Exposed everyone. My younger sister Vanessa made sure her wedding day was not just about her happiness, but also about my humiliation. While her groom's family arrived in sleek black cars and were escorted proudly to the front, I was quietly directed to a corner seat at the very back of the reception hall, next to the swinging kitchen doors where waiters rushed past carrying trays that nearly spilled over my dress. The table was labeled overflow, like I was some kind of extra guest that didn't quite belong. Earlier, when Vanessa introduced me to her in-laws, she didn't say, "This is my sister Emily, the one who helped raise me when mom was sick, the one who loaned me money for textbooks in college." No, she smirked and said, "This is my sister Emily, still waiting for someone to finally sweep her off her feet." The laugh that followed wasn't warm, it was sharp, calculated. And the way her new mother-in-law tilted her head at me full of pity burned more than if she'd rolled her eyes. At that moment, I wasn't Emily, the woman with her own career, her own worth. I was the leftover, the family embarrassment. If you've ever been made to feel invisible at a family event, like your only purpose was to be the sad example, while someone else stole the spotlight, then you'll understand the knot I carried in my stomach that night. Before I continue, tell me in the comments which city or province you're watching this from. I'm always curious to know how far my story has traveled. And if this is your first time on the channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next part, because what's about to happen will truly move and touch you. Now picture the scene with me, a glamorous country club in Ohio, chandeliers glittering above champagne glasses lined in perfect rows on white linen tables, the air buzzing with laughter and clinking silverware. The kind of wedding where everyone seems to glow. Everyone except me. I had spent weeks picking out a navy blue dress that finally made me feel beautiful, but instead of being noticed, I was hidden in the shadows, practically pressed against the kitchen doors. My mother drifted around Vanessa like a stage manager, smoothing her veil, whispering about how flawless everything looked. The only thing she said to me was, "Emily, please don't look so gloomy in the photos, all right? This is Vanessa's big day." My father, as usual, avoided eye contact, like acknowledging the tension would somehow make it worse. And so there I sat, 34 years old, the dependable older sister who had always played by the rules, now cast in the role of unwanted extra in my little sister's fairy tale show. I thought I knew how the night would go. Awkward smiles, maybe a few strained conversations, then sneaking out before anyone noticed. But fate had other plans. Because just when I was about to grab my purse and leave, a man I had never seen before pulled out the chair beside me, leaned close enough that only I could hear, and whispered words that stopped me cold. "Act like you're with me." At first I thought I'd misheard him. The music was pounding forks, clinking, people laughing too loudly at jokes they didn't even find funny. But when I turned, the man beside me was looking directly into my eyes, calm and steady, as though he had been rehearsing those exact words. "Act like you're with me." I barely had time to react before he smiled politely at a passing bridesmaid, slipped into the seat beside me, and draped his arm casually along the back of my chair. His confidence unsettled me. How could a stranger act as if he belonged at my side when even my own family had made it clear I didn't? My heart was hammering, but beneath the shock was something else: relief. For the first time all evening, I wasn't sitting alone. For the first time, I didn't look like the family misfit. But just as that flicker of hope began to rise, Vanessa's voice cut through the air like glass scraping a plate. She was across the room, introducing me to a cluster of her new in-laws. "This is Emily," she announced, tugging me by the elbow toward the group before I even had a chance to adjust my dress. "Our bookworm sister, still holding out for Mr. Right." Her words landed like darts. The group gave me those same polite, pitying smiles I had seen all day. One woman actually touched my arm and said softly, "Don't worry, dear, you still have time." Time, as though my life were some countdown clock that was about to expire. I smiled weakly, swallowing the urge to snap back, but inside my chest I felt the familiar burn humiliation laced with fury. It wasn't just the words, it was how deliberate it all felt. Vanessa didn't just happen to say it once. She had been sprinkling those comments all evening like confetti. She wanted me small, diminish the shadow that made her shine brighter. It didn't stop there. During the speeches, Vanessa raised her glass and made a toast. She thanked our parents for their support, Richard's family for welcoming her into their world, and then, like a knife slipped in mid-sentence, she added, "And to Emily, who shows us that being independent has its own charm even if it means waiting a little longer to find love." The room chuckled politely, but I felt like I'd been stripped bare in front of strangers. Independent. She said it with the same mocking lilt she used as kids when she'd call me teacher's pet. The word was no compliment. It was code for undesirable, for incomplete. My stomach churned, and for a moment I honestly wanted to vanish. And then came the bouquet toss, the part of the evening that sealed my humiliation. The DJ shouted for all the single ladies to gather, and I tried to shrink behind a marble pillar, but Vanessa spotted me. "Don't be shy, Emily," she called out, dragging me forward, her voice dripping with false cheer. I stood in the circle of 20-somethings, her groom's younger cousins, bright-eyed and giggling, while I felt every eye in the room drilling into me. Vanessa glanced at me, smirked, and with a flick of her wrist hurled the bouquet deliberately far in the opposite direction. The flowers landed in the hands of a girl young enough to be my student. Everyone clapped, cheering, while Vanessa laughed and shouted, "Looks like Emily will have to wait a little longer." The laughter stung loud and sharp, and even though no one said it outright, I could feel the unspoken message: I was the joke of the evening. I retreated to my table, my face hot and my chest tight, blinking back tears I refused to let fall in public. That was always Vanessa's victory, catching me crying, proving that she had the power to cut me down. Not this time, I told myself. Not in front of these people. I gripped my purse under the table, debating whether to slip out quietly, disappear before anyone noticed. My mother was too busy dancing with relatives to care. My father was nowhere near me, probably avoiding the embarrassment. And Vanessa? She was basking in the spotlight, surrounded by laughter, satisfied that she had succeeded in making me the family's spectacle. But what she didn't know, what I couldn't have known then, was that my humiliation had already caught someone else's attention. The same man who had whispered to me minutes earlier, the same one who had slid into my empty chair. I didn't know who he was yet. I didn't know why he cared. But as I sat there feeling my dignity collapse in front of 100 strangers, his presence was the only thing keeping me from breaking. And though my sister thought she had crushed me for good, she had unknowingly set the stage for the very thing she feared most, me no longer playing the role of her victim. I sat at that corner table, humiliated and ready to vanish, when I felt the chair beside me scrape against the floor. The man who had whispered earlier, calm, composed, dressed in a tailored gray suit, settled into the seat as though he had every right to be there. He extended his hand like we were old friends. "Daniel Reed," he said quietly, his voice steady enough to slice through the noise of clinking glasses and muffled laughter. "Richard's older brother. And you must be Emily, the sister your family won't stop talking about." For a second I froze, heat rising in my cheeks. Was he mocking me too? But then I caught the flicker of something in his eyes. Not pity, not amusement. Something closer to defiance, like he'd already made up his mind to stand in my corner. He leaned back, casually draping his arm along the chair behind me, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "I couldn't stand listening to your sister explain for the third time tonight how worried she is about you being single. So I thought I'd put an end to it." His tone was light, almost playful, but I could feel the weight of his words. He wasn't asking permission. He was offering rescue. My instinct was to laugh it off, to say I didn't need saving. But the truth was, I did. at least for tonight. So I nodded just once and let him stay. Almost immediately, I noticed heads turning. People who hadn't spared me a glance before were suddenly sneaking curious looks. A bridesmaid passed by and raised her eyebrows, clearly surprised to see me sitting with someone. Vanessa herself, still in the middle of a conversation with Richard's cousins, glanced across the room. Our eyes met. Her perfect bride smile faltered for the briefest moment before she quickly turned back, pretending nothing had changed. But I had seen it. The crack. Daniel leaned in, asking about my work. When I told him I taught English at the local high school, he didn't respond with a patronizing nod like so many others. He asked about the books I loved teaching, the kind of students who challenged me the last trip I'd taken over summer break. And when I told him about hiking in the Smoky Mountains with friends, he grinned. So you're not boring at all? Funny, I was told you might be. My laugh escaped before I could stop it, a sound I hadn't expected to hear from myself that night. The longer we talked, the lighter my chest felt. Daniel wasn't just playing a part, he was listening. Genuinely. He made me feel visible in a way I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever, at least within my own family. And it didn't take long before I noticed something strange. People were watching us. Lydia's bridesmaids, the same ones who had whispered about my sad love life earlier, were now whispering again. But this time, their glances carried curiosity instead of disdain. It was subtle at first, but I felt the shift. For hours, I had been the butt of the joke, the afterthought, the overflow guest. And now, with just a few words and a presence at my side, Daniel had quietly rewritten the narrative. I still didn't know his motives. Was this just kindness or something else? But for the first time all evening, I wasn't desperate to leave. For the first time, I wanted to stay and see what happened next. And that's when it hit me. Vanessa wasn't the only one capable of controlling the story in that room. With Daniel beside me, I had a choice. I could keep shrinking into the shadows, or I could finally, even quietly, begin to push back. The shift didn't go unnoticed for long. I could feel Vanessa's eyes burning into me from across the ballroom, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Daniel was mid-story, telling me about a failed hiking trip in Colorado, where a raccoon stole his food bag when I saw her break away from her group and head straight toward us, her gown sweeping like a weapon behind her. My pulse quickened. For a moment I thought she'd cause a scene, but she slipped into her well-rehearsed role of the gracious bride. Emily, she sang out, her voice pitched just high enough to carry. You didn't tell me you knew Daniel. She looked from me to him, eyes narrowing ever so slightly as if scanning for cracks in our story. Daniel didn't miss a beat. We go way back, he said smoothly, his hand brushing mine on the table as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It's been a while, but you know how life gets busy. I nodded, trying to keep my expression calm, even though my heart was rattling in my chest. Vanessa tilted her head, smiling that smile I knew all too well, the one that looked sweet to outsiders, but was really a warning. Funny, she said, her voice tight. Emily never mentioned you. I like to keep my private life private. I replied, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. For a second, Vanessa blinked, caught off guard, and then she laughed too brightly. Of course, she said, though I could hear the ice beneath it. She excused herself quickly, but not before giving me a look sharp enough to draw blood. I had seen that look before, on childhood mornings when she'd catch me wearing her sweater, or later when I landed a small scholarship she thought she deserved. It was the look of someone who couldn't stand not being in control. Dinner was served not long after, and Vanessa wasn't finished. As the clinking of silverware softened into murmurs, she stood with her glass raised for a toast. To family, she said, smiling out at the crowd. To love, to patience, and to the late bloomers among us who remind us that happiness comes eventually, even if it takes a little longer. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly, but it was knowing. All eyes turned to me as if I were the punchline printed on the menu. My chest burned, but before I could shrink, Daniel leaned close and whispered, "She's trying to rattle you. Don't give her the satisfaction. Something in his calm steadiness anchored me. I forced a smile, raised my own glass, and said clearly, "Well, at least we know some things are worth the wait." A ripple of laughter spread this time at Vanessa's expense. For the first time in years, I'd pushed back, even if only with a single line. But the challenges weren't just external. Inside, I was battling myself. A part of me wanted to cling to Daniel, to let him carry this whole charade and shield me from Vanessa's attacks. But another part whispered that I couldn't let this be only his fight. If I wanted to stop being the invisible sister, I had to find my own voice. That realization terrified me. I'd spent so long being silent in the face of her cruelty, avoiding conflict, playing peacekeeper. Now the thought of confronting her, even subtly, made my palms sweat. Later in the evening, as music swelled and couples filled the dance floor, Vanessa appeared again, this time with Richard at her side. "Daniel, why don't you dance with us?" she asked sweetly, her hand tightening on Richard's arm. The invitation wasn't about inclusion, it was about reclaiming her stage. But Daniel simply smiled and said, "Maybe later, we're enjoying ourselves right here." The word "we" made her jaw tighten. Her mask cracked for half a second before she smoothed it back into place, but I saw it. And for the first time, instead of shrinking, I felt a quiet spark of satisfaction. She wasn't invincible. Still, the night was far from over. Vanessa wasn't done, and I knew it. Every step forward felt like walking across glass barefoot, painful, fragile, but somehow necessary. What I didn't realize yet was that the greatest confrontation of the night was still waiting, one that would force Vanessa to drop the mask completely and reveal the raw, jealous cruelty underneath. The band slowed to a softer tune, one of those timeless ballads everyone recognized within a few notes. Couples drifted to the dance floor, swaying under the chandeliers. I sat frozen in my chair, watching from the shadows, certain no one would notice if I slipped away for good. But Daniel stood, offered his hand, and asked, "Dance with me." Not suggested, not questioned, stated like a fact. My instinct was to refuse, to hide, to protect myself from another public spectacle, but something in his gaze left no room for escape. I placed my hand in his, and suddenly I was being led out into the center of the room, into the very spotlight I'd been avoiding all night. His arm rested around my waist, steady and sure, while my hand settled against his shoulder. For a moment, the noise of clinking glasses and laughter faded, and all I could hear was the rhythm of the song and the steady beat of my own heart. "Your sister's watching." Daniel murmured, his lips close enough that I could feel the words against my skin. I dared to glance across the room. Vanessa stood stiff, her eyes locked on us, her bridal smile slipping like wax in the heat. "I know," I whispered. "She looks like she's going to explode." He chuckled softly. "Good. Let's give her a show." We moved with an ease I didn't expect, his confidence guiding my hesitant steps. For the first time all night, I wasn't shrinking. I was visible, centered, undeniable. Around us, whispers rippled like wind through tall grass. I could see guests leaning toward each other, curious, intrigued. The very people who had pitied me hours earlier were now studying us with raised eyebrows and stolen smiles. And then, like a storm cloud, Vanessa appeared at the edge of the dance floor, Richard trailing behind her. She plastered on her sweetest grin, though her eyes betrayed the fury beneath. "Mind if I cut in?" she asked, her tone light, but her grip on her gown taut with strain. Daniel didn't flinch. "Actually, yes," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We're having a moment." The air shifted instantly. Gasps, murmurs, silence stretching taut as wire. Vanessa's smile trembled. "Of course," she said, but the words came out brittle. Then, as if to reclaim her power, she added loudly, "I'm just glad Emily finally found someone. We were all so worried about her." It was a knife dressed as kindness, and everyone knew it. Daniel's hand tightened around mine. "Were you?" he asked evenly, his eyes steady on hers. "Because from what I've seen tonight, you've been more interested in humiliating her than supporting her." The room froze. Richard's mouth opened, then closed clearly, uncertain how to intervene. Guests shifted in their seats, some pretending to sip their drinks while watching intently. Vanessa's face flushed, her mask shattering under the weight of being called out so plainly, so publicly. We just want what's best for her," she stammered, her voice cracking. Daniel shook his head slightly. "Then maybe show it. Respect isn't optional, especially from family." His words weren't cruel. They were calm, controlled, but they landed like a gavel striking the bench. And just like that, the entire dynamic flipped. Vanessa wasn't the gracious bride anymore. She was exposed, petty, small. As she stumbled back toward her table, I realized something I never thought I'd see. People were looking at her the way they had looked at me earlier, with a mix of pity and discomfort. Only now the whispers weren't about me. They were about her. But the night had one more twist left. The DJ announced the garter toss, calling for all the single men to gather. The crowd laughed and cheered, men clapping each other on the back as they jostled for position. Daniel stepped forward, his stride unhurried, confident. I caught Vanessa's sharp intake of breath from across the room. "Wait," she cried louder than necessary. "Daniel, you can't. You're not single." Her voice cracked desperation, cutting through the last of her polished composure. But Daniel only smiled, glancing back at me. "Actually," he said smoothly, "I am. Emily and we're reconnecting, taking things slow." The DJ tossed the garter into the air, and as if fate itself had chosen sides, it landed directly in Daniel's hands. The room erupted in cheers. According to tradition, he was supposed to place it on the leg of the woman who caught the bouquet, but that girl had already left. "Looks like we need a volunteer," the DJ joked. All eyes turned to me. My breath caught, but Daniel's hand was already extended. "Come on," he said softly. My legs moved before my brain caught up, and suddenly I was seated at the center of the room, while he knelt in front of me, sliding the garter gently onto my leg. The cheers, the laughter, the flashes of cameras, it should have been mortifying. But instead, I felt powerful. Not because of the garter, not even because of Daniel, but because for once I wasn't the joke. I was the center. I was the story. And when I dared to glance at Vanessa, her face was twisted in fury, her perfect day unraveling in her hands. For years she had lived off making me small, but tonight, in front of everyone, I had risen without even planning it. And the irony was undeniable. The humiliation she had orchestrated had become her own undoing. The applause from the garter toss still echoed as people drifted back to their seats. But the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't just a wedding anymore, it felt like a reckoning. I could see it in the way eyes lingered on me now, not with pity, but with curiosity, even respect. Guests who had politely ignored me earlier were suddenly eager to strike up conversations. One of Richard's aunts, the same woman who had patted my arm earlier and suggested church groups, leaned over during dessert and whispered, "I always knew you'd surprise us, Emily. You have that quiet strength." I smiled politely, though part of me wanted to laugh at the sudden reversal. Quiet strength. No one had ever noticed it before tonight. Across the room, Vanessa sat stiffly at the head table, her hands clenched around her champagne glass. She was smiling, always smiling, but her jaw was tight. Her laughter too sharp, her eyes darting toward me every few seconds like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She had planned this day down to the last rose petal, the last toast, the last smug remark designed to put me in my place. But the script had flipped, and she couldn't claw it back. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. My parents' reactions were quieter but telling. My father, who had spent most of the evening avoiding my gaze, finally gave me a nod from across the room, like he just realized I wasn't invisible after all. My mother's smile was brittle, her eyes darting nervously between me and Vanessa, as if she were calculating which daughter needed her loyalty most in that moment. For once, she didn't rush to smooth over the tension. She just stayed silent, perhaps realizing that silence had been her role all along. Daniel never left my side. He steered conversations, gently filling in awkward gaps, but he also made space for me to speak, as though his role wasn't to overshadow, but to amplify. At one point, while I was laughing at something a guest said, I felt his hand rest lightly over mine. The gesture was small, almost unnoticeable, but it steadied me more than he could know. For hours, I'd felt like I was playing a part in his script. But in that moment, I realized something had shifted. He wasn't just pretending, and neither was I. When the night wound down and guests began gathering coats and purses, Daniel offered to walk me to my car. Outside, the cool air felt sharp against my skin after the heat of the ballroom. We walked slowly across the parking lot, the muffled music fading behind us. For the first time all night, there were no eyes watching, no whispers, no expectations. Just us. I stopped by my car, clutching the strap of my purse, unsure how to bridge the gap between pretend and real. "Thank you," I said, finally, my voice unsteady. "I know tonight was just an act, but you saved me from one of the worst nights of my life." He studied me, his expression unreadable but his eyes soft. "What makes you think it was just an act?" My breath caught. The words hung in the air, daring me to believe them. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the overlooked sister. I felt seen. And though Vanessa thought she had destroyed me, she had unknowingly given me the one thing she never intended: the chance to finally discover what I was worth. It's strange how quickly life can change direction. That night at Vanessa's wedding, I walked in expecting to leave with nothing but bruised pride and fresh scars from years of being her favorite punchline. Instead, I walked out with something else, entirely a sense that my story wasn't over, and maybe for the first time it was mine to write. Weeks passed and Daniel didn't fade into the background the way I expected. He called. He asked to meet for coffee, for walks, for dinners, where we actually talked. Not about my sister, not about the wedding, but about us. There was no pretense anymore. No pretending. 3 months later, we were officially together. 6 months after that, I moved into his apartment in the city, and we started planning a future I'd almost given up believing was possible. The irony wasn't lost on me. Vanessa had spent years defining me by what I lacked: a husband, children, the kind of picture-perfect milestones she collected like trophies. She built her entire identity on being ahead while I lagged behind. And yet, by trying so hard to humiliate me, she ended up delivering me straight into the arms of the man who would become the love of my life. When Daniel proposed on the anniversary of her wedding, he did it quietly, just the two of us at dinner. No grand spectacle, no spotlight. And when he slid the ring onto my finger, I realized something important. The revenge wasn't in having a wealthier partner than her, or in showing her I was finally chosen. The real revenge was that I no longer cared about her scoreboard at all. I had stopped playing her game. I had found something real, something she couldn't manipulate or diminish, and that was worth more than all her carefully crafted perfection. Vanessa's reaction to our engagement was predictable. A brittle smile, a few half-hearted congratulations, followed by silence. She never apologized, never admitted what she had done. But by then, it didn't matter. I didn't need her approval anymore. What I needed, I already had: a partner who saw me for who I was, a life that wasn't defined by being less than, and finally, a peace I never thought I'd feel. Looking back now, I see her wedding for what it really was. Yes, it was the worst night of my life. Humiliation, cruelty, the kind of pain only family can inflict. But it was also the turning point. Without that night, I might never have been vulnerable enough to accept help from a stranger. Without her cruelty, I might never have found the courage to stop hiding. Sometimes the very people who try to break us are the ones who unintentionally set us free. And sometimes the sweetest justice isn't in proving them wrong, it's in realizing you never needed to prove anything at all. Thank you for listening until the very last moments of this story. Please leave a comment and share your thoughts and feelings. And if this is your first time visiting this channel, don't forget to hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you won't miss out on these real-life stories that are deep, bitter, and full of spectacular plot twists. See you in the next videos.